Welcome to the GCSP 25th anniversary event on Human Security Reloaded. You may be wondering, why should we talk about human security now? When the concept was conceived more than 2 decades ago, there was an understanding that the state security approach was not enough to address security challenges that crossed borders, and that focus on an individual was necessary to address them. Today, in times of COVID-19, Ebola, climate change, increasing poverty and inequality, and growing movement of people that includes IDPs, migration, and refugee flows, there is an even greater need of innovative contemporary policies and actions by various security and other actors. The three main elements of human security, namely the freedom from want, freedom from fear, and freedom to live in dignity, require an update. This is why we are organizing this event, to get insights on how human security can be applied and updated in the new normal in 2020 and beyond. To speak about this, we have invited two excellent experts. First, Dr. Njoki Wamai, who's an assistant professor at the International Relations Department, an accomplished scholar focusing her work on critical peace and security studies, transitional justice and human rights interventions in Africa, African feminisms, and politics of knowledge production. She is also a GCSP alumna of the New Issues in the Security course in 2009. Second speaker is Dr. Rama Mani, who is a transformative leader, peace builder, poet, and performance artist, whose life, work, and art are devoted to human and global transformation. She is convener and acting Global Transformation Center for International Studies at the University of Oxford, founder of Theatre of Transformation Academy, co-founder of Home for Humanity, founding counselor of the at the World Future Council. Rama is also a former director of the New Issues in Security course at the GCSP and currently a GCSP Associate Fellow. After the speakers' presentations, we will open the floor for questions. Please put your questions in the Q&A tab of the Zoom. Dr. Njoki Wamai, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anna. How long do I have?
15, 20 minutes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Anna, it's so good to be here again. Of course, I'm in Nairobi, but virtually to be together at GCSP as an alumnus of GCSP. As Anna has said, I was part of the New Issues in Security course where she was our coordinator. That's in 2009. So it's 11 years ago, and it gives me great pleasure to just join the GCSP community, because I have very, very fond memories of my time in Geneva, and very fond memories of my classmates also, and also my lecturers then, like Rama Mani, who I'm very, very happy to be in a webinar together with. Actually, it's Rama, I think, who taught us human security then. So it's really, really nice. It's such a homecoming. Of course, a sad moment, because as highlighted earlier by Anna, COVID-19 has led to devastation. We are at a difficult time in global history. And of course, pandemics, a pandemic that none of us could have thought about this last year. But I will start and say COVID-19 has led to a devastating loss of lives and livelihoods, something we're not focusing on, livelihoods. But more important is how COVID-19 has exposed global inequalities, or not just global, but inequalities at various levels that existed before in a very, very profound way. So inequalities along class at a more local level, inequalities along class, inequalities along race in different states. We've seen how like people of color are more affected by COVID, are dying more of COVID, largely because of the many inequalities that have existed in terms of the jobs they have that expose them more to the disease, in terms of their health, which has been neglected for a long time by different states. We've seen that in the US, we've seen that in Britain. Gender and the many inequalities that this has exposed women, and there are so many papers right now being written, how COVID has exposed the gender inequalities along. For many women now are forced to start doing not just the care work, but also are the ones that are laid off first in many many employers are laying off women first, and then women have to do the care work for the sick and also for people at home. So beyond race, class, and gender, COVID-19 has exposed the global inequalities in a profound way. So the global inequalities that we've been talking about, the human security concept also focuses on, in trying to address pandemics, like whether it's COVID, Ebola, and climate change. So COVID-19, and that's what I'll focus more on, these global inequalities. And so COVID-19, if there's one thing we should start thinking about beyond the loss of lives, which is also a very sad thing, and again it's loss of lives along those things we've talked about, is the loss of livelihoods and who are losing the livelihoods, and also looking at how COVID-19 continues to exacerbate the already inequalities that existed among women, among people of color, among countries, states right now. So the global inequalities we are talking about among regions, the global north and the global south. As we look at the vaccine right now, who is producing it? Again, it's the global north. When will people in the global south get the vaccine? And so all these challenges, of course, somebody can say, why can't you produce your vaccine? But we also all know the global inequalities that also exist in terms of capital and financing and brain drain. So the human security paradigm, which emerged in the early 2000s, of course, captured this. It saw the future, and it captured the need and the importance to move beyond the state-centric view of security and start looking beyond the state and focus on the individual as the referent point for security. And so far, globally, despite the developments made by lobbies, by many states that focus and support human security, and also a lot of academic work done on human security, still the human security paradigm is yet to be implemented as equally as the national or state security paradigm. And as we acknowledge the role that people like Amartya Sen, Roland Paris, and Ramamani and others who have theorized and talked about the things that we need to focus on in human security, and more so looking at Amartya Sen's freedom from want, freedom from fear, and freedom from dignity, and looking at what the GCSP is asking us to think around about a reloaded concept of human security. And I was thinking about it, that the GCSP is challenging us to think beyond these three concepts of freedom from want, freedom from fear, freedom from dignity, that we require an update. And I would want to argue that, of course, these three, if we look at the three freedoms that Amartya Sen proposed, freedom from want, that is hunger, and especially hunger, freedom from fear, security, personal security, and freedom from dignity. And make it so. For me, I want to focus on this freedom from dignity, especially for people from the global south. As somebody also working and teaching in Nairobi, in a university in Nairobi, and living in Nairobi in Kenya. And freedom, when we look at this freedom from dignity, I think we need to unpack it further. Amartya Sen was talking about, of course, the dignity to live a full life, a life where, you know, if your healthcare and your food and all that, the basic needs are taken care of. But looking at the world today, and that's back to this conversation, this point I was making, that if there's for me, the most profound thing that COVID-19 has done is exposing these global inequalities that exist. And these global inequalities, if we continue in this operation, whatever, however we operate, whether it's in trade terms, Africa still trades, Africa's global trade is less than 4% of the global trade. If we look at something like global trade, which and largely, yes, there's a lot to do with Africa, for instance. I'm going to use Africa a lot, sorry, as for my case study, because that's Africa, of course, is many countries. But when I say Africa, I do not mean that I'm homogenizing an entire continent. I am just saying that so that we have a reference point. And so for me, dignity and trade and security and all these things are equally related. We need to start unpacking Amartya Sen's concept of freedom from dignity, to expand, to start thinking as individual countries, both in the global north and all these developed, for lack of a better word, countries that for instance, like the US or with the countries in Europe. If we continue the way things are, and I think COVID-19 should help us start challenging. If it's trade, how do we trade with the countries in the global south? Go to the WTO. Let us see the unfair regimes that prevent many of these African countries, many of the countries in Asia and Latin America from trading equally, because of the way the WTO was formed initially to favor, again, the most developed countries at that time in the 1940s. Is it still relevant today? So that's one. Trade, how do we challenge our trade practices and start looking at them in terms of how can they offer a more equal platform? How do we reduce our tariffs? How do we stop subsidies in Europe that prevent countries from the global south from trading equally with us? So for me, dignity, we need to move beyond just rhetoric. So dignity, for one, is trade. How do we address global trade inequalities that can even the playing field for many of these countries? So if we can unpack this dignity, I think, so I'm not, as much as we may require an update, but I think for me the update is opening up what dignity means. And in dignity, for me, I'm interpreting it, for instance, one example we need to look at is trade, ensuring we have global platforms that guarantee everybody's treated, every life matter. I know, of course, it was used in very wrong ways in the US, but all lives matter. So whether it's people of color, people of the north, all lives matter. So if we could address trade, that is one thing, global inequalities and trade. And I know, yes, we're in the field of security. I studied the new issues in security, but it's time we started seeing the interlinkages between our security, and that's why we are looking at human security, because we cannot have dignity if we continue having unequal trade practices that prevent some countries from ever getting out of poverty. And so the global north and the west will always be this benefactor, but for whose good? For its own good. So another thing is, how do we start the whole pharmaceutical industry? Right now, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and I think Oxford have they're in very advanced stages of the vaccine. Again, why is it, why can't we develop capacity beyond, you know how, of course, beyond even before developing capacity, you know how drugs and the drug regime, again, going back to this issue of trade that I'm focusing on, is very capitalist. It's very capitalist about making money. It's not about the dignity of the people. Of course, I know we invest a lot of money in drugs and vaccines, but how do we move beyond, how do we move beyond this capitalist way of making medicine, of the whole health industry? Because that's part of the problem we have. Why is it people of color are dying in the US? Because there's no healthcare for many people of color who, again, they're the most, they'll have less incomes most of the time. So how do we deal with all these global inequalities? And for me, if we can deal with them, it's by addressing trade, by addressing really the capitalist regime that shapes our world. And one thing I know, Francis Fukuyama at one point, I think after the end of the Cold War, said that the end of history. I think what COVID-19 has done is challenged that end of history. It's time, I think history did not end. It is time we went back there and started a more equal regime and paradigm of the world. And it's time to also see human security and uplift or raise human security to the status of national security. If there's anything that COVID-19 has done, is to bring back human security, which was waning, and especially after 9/11, human security was waning, and states were now into national security, and also the kind of partnerships, especially like the US partnered with, even for many African countries, it was really basically on geopolitics and to protect the US from future terrorist attacks. But now we've seen diseases like Ebola, diseases like, of course, COVID-19 and climate change, which really speaks to which affects all of us. So I think my time is almost done. And so I will stop at that and say, let's get back to that freedom from dignity and expand it to start rethinking, what does it mean? That's the update I think we need, and start thinking about moving and revising Francis Fukuyama and others who thought that capitalism has won, and start linking and start seeing the effects that capitalist paradigm has had. And let's embrace human security and give it I think give it the place now it deserves, which it always deserved this, but because of these capitalist regimes in the world, it was not given the credence it deserves. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Joki. And I think it was really important what you say. You really brought up this idea of freedom to live in dignity as not compared, but alongside the freedom from fear, freedom from want, because I think that this is something that we don't really think about that much. And the COVID-19 crisis and the exacerbation of inequalities actually brings back this conversation to the fore. So I really commend you on bringing this to this discussion. Thank you so much. We will come back to you with questions, but now I will give the floor to Dr. Ramamani.
Thank you. A beautiful big circle coming back. I look at Geneva behind you, at buildings which did not exist when GCSP started 25 years ago, but GCSP was just on the other side of the lake with the Graduate Institute. And I was just round the corner so I since yesterday was Thanksgiving, not a normal Thanksgiving in the US, and since we've been a bit fixated on the US in the last weeks for obvious reasons, I want to give my little bit of thanks first to Geneva itself for being such a pioneer of human security, even back then, because I came to Geneva a little bit more, 28 years ago, to work on the Commission on Global Governance. And at the time that human security was being born, and thanks to the Canton of Geneva and the government of Geneva giving a very generous grant and a space in Geneva, we were able to take forward this work where we pioneered this idea of, we called it the security of people and planet, but it was really coinciding with the launch of human security, which was coined, you could say, in 94, but had been emerging at that time. And then GCSP, you know, which allowed me as the director of this new course to take the whole concept of transatlantic traditional state security into the arena of human security, and lead this very dynamic course with extraordinary people as we got more and more people like you, Njoki, from all of the countries which were really facing all of these new security challenges. And then again, in a third iteration, when I came back from Sri Lanka and started pioneering theatre of transformation, which we were developing at the University of Oxford, as a kind of transformative methodology enacting global transformation, thanks to your new not any longer so new director, but the openness of GCSP and Ambassador Ducey to experiment how people respond, people in policymaking positions nationally and internationally, to human security. So in the course, I remember back in 2005, 2006, when I was directing this totally revamped course, it was incredible to see seasoned diplomats, military officials, some of them coming back from peacekeeping missions, and within a couple of weeks of being introduced to this new approach of what really is a security threat, of working with colleagues from around the world, they were saying, oh my gosh, this is a no-brainer. Of course, this is the future of security. And then, you know, in this last iteration over the last 7-8 years, as I took human security a step further to actually share and enact stories of people who have faced these threats of security and transformed themselves and their societies and created new paradigms based on exactly, Njoki, what you were talking about, you know, this freedom to live in dignity, not just take care of fear and want, but actually find ways to live together in dignity. It's been amazing to see how it's had this effect on people. So right now, why now? You explained it beautifully, Anna, why we need to discuss reloading security now. But you know what, since you did introduce me as a poet and performer and so on, in addition to being a scholar and academic, I feeling quite emotional about this 25-year journey with human security. Wondering where next? How do we load human security? I prepared a little ode to human security, which I also lovingly called Going Nowhere, or now where to go. So it's a crash course for those who aren't up to date with where has this 25-year journey started and where has it brought us and now what? So there we go. An ode to human security. Your conception coincided with the Cold War's last tides and its illogical logic of mutual doom. You were mothered in the countless wombs on Mother Earth, whose children were martyred in others' proxy wars. You were fathered by 3 pioneers of a new economy committed to free human capability from the stranglehold of state security. Your naissance was a renaissance for we, the peoples, enslaved for 5 decades by the P5's whims and wars. You were heralded right away by the United Nations and championed by those virtuous small nations who made you the star of their security decisions. Ah, glorious your childhood, those first 7 years as states and civil society joined hands and victory followed victory at lightning pace without arms. Landmines, child soldiers, the ICC, human trafficking, economic and environmental security, the protection of civilians in war, the responsibility to protect each other. For finally we realized what happens to one affects all life on earth. But while you grew stronger each year and delivered the forgotten promise of freedom from fear and want, as you sought to bestow the freedom of dignity to one and all, oh dear, the dominant powers who detested you for loosening their clutch on sovereignty and military might were awaiting an occasion to throw you and your champions into the dungeons of oblivion. And so they strove to dismantle you brick by brick, starting with 9/11. The war on terror was the perfect alibi to reinstate state security as the only way out, to expand arms purchases while closing hospitals and schools. For after all, they declared, only weapons and markets, not doctors or teachers, can protect our citizens and keep us safe. So they stifled popular protests as soldiers were unleashed against civilians, bombs dropped on citizens, refugees left to drown at sea, environmental security martyred for limitless economic growth for the few and misery for most. We, the peoples, witnessed reality in stunned silence, while demagogues usurped democracy with false news and stripped multilateralism to shreds before its 70th anniversary. Now, this malaise has come to give us a last chance. COVID has shaken us to our senses. Nature has revealed life's essence. Floyd has ripped apart old defenses. A new cry is rising from all parts of the world. There is no going back to the old business that brought us to this pitiable state. So here we are. It's up to us. Is there nowhere to go? Or shall we ask ourselves anew, now, where shall we dare to venture together to reload human security with planetary well-being, with integral justice for people and nature, with the unity embedded in our humanity, with ourselves, with each other, and all forms of life? Yes, friends, with a new commitment to make our earth a safe and caring home, not just for humans, but for all our kith and kin. Wasn't that better than a 2-hour lecture on human security? But that's where we've been. And if we say where now, I join hands with Nunjoki. This, as you said, COVID has brought home the one big word, inequality and injustice, and you laid it out. And this has been the big message that what we need now, as all of the global protests, the solidarity movements from Korea, all the way across Japan, across Africa, across Europe, holding hands with the Black Lives Matter movement to say it's every kind of injustice that now needs to be addressed, because that is the real leitmotif of human security. That is what determines whether we will be able to guarantee the security of our citizens, which is essential for state security. So we've come to a point, as you said, Anna and Joki, where actually the two have to become synonymous. When we've shown that all of the military arsenals, which have continued to be built up, even during COVID, right? Several arms sales proceeded even while governments were scrambling in the face of economic lockdown and a reduction of economic growth. They proceeded to honor their arms purchases and sales. So even while that's happening, and we've realized that all those military arsenals, all those military forces are no competition for this little invisible virus. It's really this view of an integrated justice, which covers the ecological justice, because we've seen how, as the World Future Council has been telling us since the beginning, all of these issues of health, economics, security, disarmament is absolutely interlinked with our environmental security. The socioeconomic issue which you laid out, who was the most affected? The cultural, which races, which minorities, the natives, the indigenous populations were most affected. The gender issue, and of course, which is closest to my heart, the political issue. The wars that continue to be waged despite the UN Secretary General's call and millions of citizens signing up to the call for a ceasefire. Over this period, through our Oxford initiative, we had a seminar where we actually looked at what might be, thanks to COVID, a new human security agenda rooted in integral justice. And we spoke to people who are at the front lines of trying to secure the security of citizens, fight for human rights and justice in Iraq, in Afghanistan, with the former head of the Human Rights Commission, who's currently working for the government on human rights, the former human rights minister of Iraq, with the head of the biggest NGO movement in Sri Lanka, with the former minister of women's rights in Palestine, with a former student from my NISC course who's stuck in Gaza as a diplomat and unable to do anything. He would have joined our call today, but he's ill, and we pray it's not COVID. And we've been in touch even over the last days with so many of our partners who are really seeing what to do. Because if we've come to this point where, on the one hand, every issue of injustice has worsened, as human security has been endangered and the right to live in dignity has been endangered, yet we've discovered one element of security, of justice, which is what I call metaphysical justice, the real meaning, the real values of life. Because even despite all of the hardship in every single part of the world, where from my home I've reached out to colleagues and partners and collaborators, what I've heard stories about is this metaphysics of what happens to you happens to me, the acts of solidarity. So where can governments now turn for a new security policy? Well, let's turn with them. Yesterday, I was fortunate to have a long call with one of my closest partners, many of them around the world, by my close colleagues in Syria who are working with the Syrian civil defense, filled me in on the situation in Raqqa, which now there is no fighting as such. But what is the situation in these war zones when barely there are any hospitals to cope with the needs of the people, where people are not prepared, are not told what to do when suddenly the lockdown comes in, where they have no idea how to move forward. And I received a whole update from the province of Raqqa from my colleague Noor Saleh, who is in close touch over there. But I also spoke at length to our close partners. I've many times shared their stories over here of how did ordinary civil society, in this case, in the slums of Mumbai, respond to what happened during COVID. And I want to share just a tiny bit of the pieces, the lessons in human security I got from my sisters in the slums of Mumbai. And I'm very delighted that some of them are on the line, and I hope they will join our Q&A later. So, namaste. Hello. I am Mumtaz Sheikh, and with me are my sisters, Biju, the president of our Mahila Mandal, and Alka, one of our team leaders. Today, I will not tell you the story of how we started the Mahila Mandal in the slums of Mumbai. You do not need to hear that. All I will tell you is it started out with us women in the slums, always facing violence every day of our lives, until the day we realized that alone we cannot do anything, but together there is a lot we can do. Over the years, we created the federation. It is like, you could say, a government with no political parties, with no ideologies except one: the security of every single human being, child, woman, man, in every single home of our slums around the whole city of Mumbai, and now spreading across our state in Maharashtra and into Rajasthan. Let me tell you what happened when COVID came. Of course, we were not prepared. In the slums, we had no idea how to cope. But then, it was the heat of the summer in March and April. Most of us live in corrugated iron shacks with no toilet, no running water. But if we would try to get out of the terrible heat or go to the toilet or to get water, we would be beaten by the police. So immediately we women began to organize. Luckily, we were in our communities, so we were able to prepare a list of the most vulnerable people because we had one idea. During this pandemic lockdown, not one person should be left behind. No one should feel they will have to go hungry. No one should feel there is no one to care with them. We started distributing rations in each of our slums. And inside the ration card, we put the phone number of our women counselors. And we said, if you have any trouble, phone us. This is how we received calls to know about the most isolated groups. For example, let me tell you, the transgender community. Yes, they were being locked up in their house because they were being abused. But they wrote to us and we found a way to give them food and to give them humanitarian supplies even then. The cases of the women who were being abused, because as the Secretary General has said, there were more than 200 cases in that early lockdown of women who were traumatized even more than before because their husbands were desperate, so stressed, no job, no way to feed their family. Some of them would throw their women into the street. Where can they go? We would counsel them just by phone and give them some support, and also the men, to say to them, we are with you. Yes, the police abused us, but 3 weeks ago when it was Diwali, we went to the police stations. We put beautiful decorations and lights, and we said, we are here to support you and work with you. We understand your stress, but only together, judges, parliamentarians, police, together, we can solve this problem of human security, and we can be a force for overcoming this situation and securing our people. This is just a bit of our story. I could tell you much more later on. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mumtaz. It was such an honor to speak to you, Biju and Alka, yesterday. There's been years that we've been on this journey, but I was amazed to hear all of the different ways in which you've interacted with the local community because you're amongst them. So where could we go now to reload human security? I take away 3 lessons from this. 1, we have to turn to civil society because they are the ones who've put their lives on the line, risked the health of their own children in order to cope and be there in solidarity with each other. We have to learn the ingenious ways that groups like Koro and the Women's Federation of the Slums of Mumbai have found to be there every moment through the worst of it all as this pandemic has spread out, and always with a concern for human security paramount, taking the UN's no one left behind, the slogan of the SDGs, literally, and delivering on it, walking the talk, so to speak. It will be about taking seriously what I call integral justice, all of these interlinked dimensions of inequality that Njoki evoked and that I reiterated. And above all, it will be going back, as the Earth Charter said years ago, as even the Pope said in his Laudato Si, is how do we create on our planet a safe home for every human being and for all forms of life. We have to come home to that reality if we are to reload human security, but more important, if we are simply to proceed together as a human species on this endangered planet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rama, for this very powerful message. What I wanted to really commend is that you are bringing together this extensive knowledge that you have, through your academic work that you've been doing for so long, and now connecting it to the art and to your being such a great performer, because I think it is very powerful. I think that we would like to share your ode to human security with other publics of the GCSP, because I think it's, as you said, it really brings the history of human security at the same time when it shows really the challenges of it. And thank you as well for bringing this idea of integrated justice that is so important now, and the call for leaving no one behind. I think it's so crucial. And as you both said, the freedom to live in dignity, a part of the concept of human security, is really needs urgently needs it's an upgrade. And I just wanted to add something from the theory of human security. We shouldn't forget the two pillars of human security that are, on one hand, protection, and on the other hand, the empowerment. And I think both of you really touched upon this issue. Protection, of course, because of what's happening now, the communities, the individuals need to be protected by our governments. And for the time being, these are the actors that are going to do it. But at the same time, giving the space to individuals and to communities to really reach down into their wisdom, into the knowledge that they have, and being able to bring them up and just do what they know to do, and giving them the space to do it. So thank you so much again. I think it was really very, very powerful. I actually don't see any questions in the Q&A, and this is why we have the pleasure to have with us Ms. Mumtaz Shaikh, who's working with women communities in the slums of Mumbai. And we wanted to greet you and give you the floor to tell us a little bit more about your work and how the Human Security Reloaded functions in your context, and how does it function in concretely?
So Mumtaz will speak in Hindi and I will translate. She's more comfortable doing so. Is that fine? I think it'll add a little touch to this very global a set of participants that you've pulled together at GCSP.
Excellent.
Go ahead, Mumtaz. I think you've got muted again. Yes.
Yes. Thank you all. Thank you, Rama ji. हमारी बातों को यहाँ पे सबके सामने रखने के लिए जी बिल्कुल जो आपने स्टोरी में बताया है और हमने भी देखा है, तो बहुत ज़रूरत है कि हम लोगों में भाईचारा दिखाए, इंसानियत दिखाए, क्योंकि अगर हम एक दूसरे को इंसान मानते हैं तो एक दूसरे की रिस्पेक्ट करना और उनको साथ में लेके जाना बहुत ज़रूरी है.
So I'll just start with this. She said, thank you for what you shared. That's exactly what we've experienced, because what we have seen is that the most important is humanity, showing humanity and brotherhood to each other, solidarity to each other. If that is there, then we can overcome.
और उसकी ज़रूरत भी इसके लिए है कि हम दुनिया भर से जुड़े हैं. अगर आज भी हम देखें तो हमारे में इंसानियत बहुत मायने रखती है, जो एक दूसरे के प्रति होनी चाहिए. फिर वो किस देश का है, उसको भाषा आती ही कि नहीं, ये सारे मायने नहीं रखते हैं. जब आप एक दूसरे की आंखों में देखते हो, वो प्यार, वो सौहार्द जो है वो हम लोगों के सामने रखें. और यही हमने हमारी बस्तियों में देखा है और यही हमने सीखा है. तो हम जिस बस्ती से आए हैं वहाँ पे ये सारी चीज़ें रोज़मर्रा के इसमें हम देखते हैं.
Yeah. What we realize is when we look at each other, when we look in each other's eyes and see the humanity, see the commonality, see the love, then we forget which country are we from, which language do we speak, what is our background, and we work with each other on that basis. And that's literally what we have seen every single day during COVID in our slums.
तो इसीलिए जब कम्युनिटी जाती है कि जो आपने पुलिस का उदाहरण दिया, अगर उसमें हम जाएं, अगर देखा जाए तो बहुत गुस्सा था, बहुत स्ट्रेस था, लेकिन किसी एक लाइन पे आके आप ये बोलते हो कि आप इंसान हैं और हमें एक दूसरे का सपोर्ट करना है, तो वो पहल जो है वो कम्युनिटी के लोगों ने की है. और अभी इसीलिए भी हमें लगता है कि हम तैयार हैं कि आने वाली कोई भी चीज़ें हो, कोई भी तकलीफ़ हो, तो हम एक दूसरे का साथ देंगे. थोड़ा बहुत इधर उधर हो जाता है, लेकिन वो मायने नहीं रखता है जब आप ये तय करते हो कि आपको करना क्या है. तो वो चाहे कोविड हो, चाहे वायलेंस अगेंस्ट वीमेन हो, चाहे जिस तरीके से अभी भी भारत में किसानों का मार्च चल रहा है, तो भले ही लोग वहाँ पे नहीं है लेकिन सभी लोग उनके साथ है। ये भावना बहुत काम करती है जब आप स्ट्रेस में होते हो, ऐसे मुझे लगता है।
Okay, I hope you know what, Mumtaz, I didn't properly introduce you, so I'm just going to say very quickly that Mumtaz is Mumtaz Sheikh. She's calling us now from Mumbai. She's both a program manager for Coro India, beautiful organization. Their website is just coro-india.org, I think, or .in.
coroindia.org.
.org. And at the same time, she's the head of the Women's Empowerment Program. So the empowerment, Anna, that you mentioned. And literally herself came from being one of the victims of all of those issues that we've discussed that women face in such communities, to becoming a most incredibly inspiring mentor, and to say that she was also the pioneer of the Right to Pee campaign. So talking about human security, the kinds of issues, Anna, that, you know, talk about dignity and the dignity of women who did not have any safe place to even fulfill their bodily needs. And she was recognized in 2015 or 2016, Mumtaz, by the BBC as one of the 100 women to watch out for. So this is a heroine on our screen. Yeah. But I've seen her at work, mentoring, empowering other women who, you know, are finding their way to their own power. So just to try and quickly see if I can remember the very beautiful things she said is, you know, going back to the example I shared about the police, where they went and celebrated Diwali with the police. She said, of course, there was a lot of stress, there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of violence. But the important thing was to recognize what is it that they are working for. And if we are in the face, whatever it is, you know, and today we've learned how to deal with COVID. Tomorrow it's back to violence against women. It may be some other crisis. But if we know what we are working for and we always work together, we can, you know, get over the negativity, the violence, the challenges that come. It's not the challenges won't come, but we will be able to be focused and get over them together with respect for each other. There were so many other things that you shared. Is there something specific, Anna, that you would want to hear from Mumtaz on the ground? Mumtaz, there were so many other things I couldn't cover. Is there something else you would wish to share about how human security was affected and how you responded? Like what you did on the day of the 25th of November, the day of violence against women, was a beautiful example of how you brought citizens, civil society, and governments together.
So can I share?
Please.
Please.
Yes.
Okay. तो जैसे सबको पता है 25 नवंबर से 10 दिसंबर ये जो वायलेंस अगेंस्ट वुमेन का डे, तो पहला डे जो है वो महिला दिन के तहत माना जाता है। तो हमने उस कैंपेन को नाम ही दिया है महिला अधिकार से मानव अधिकार तक, विमेन राइट टू ह्यूमन राइट्स। ये अभियान है और इसमें हमने एक चीज़ की कि कम्युनिटी में जो लोग वायलेंस अगेंस्ट वुमेन के खिलाफ काम कर रहे हैं, वो कुछ रिक्शा ड्राइवर और WCD जो डिपार्टमेंट है, विमेन एंड चाइल्ड डेवलपमेंट जो डिपार्टमेंट है, और फैमिली कोर्ट के जज, इनको हमने इकट्ठा लाया और उनको हमने कहा कि इस कैंपेन में सिर्फ कम्युनिटी की जिम्मेदारी नहीं है, तो एज अ स्टेक होल्डर आपकी भी जिम्मेदारी है कि आपको लोगों तक पहुंचना चाहिए। और अभी आने वाले 15 दिन हम इकट्ठा सब काम कर रहे हैं, साथ में आ रहे हैं। तो ये जो ऑफिसर्स हैं वो कम्युनिटी में आएंगे, लोगों से बात करेंगे, वहाँ पे जो भी केसेस आएगी वो हल होगा और इससे कम्युनिटी की क्या सिचुएशन है ये भी लोगों के सामने जाएगी। तो इस तरीके का ये प्रोग्राम है और हमारे इस प्रोग्राम के लिए 2 जज जो प्रिंसिपल जज है फैमिली कोर्ट के और उनके सेक्रेटरी वो आए थे। जो पुलिस है तो जोन 6 है, तो उसके 10 पुलिस स्टेशन के लोग हमारे साथ हैं जो उनकी वैन में बैठकर अनाउंसमेंट कर रहे हैं इस कैंपेन के बारे में, जो हालांकि होता नहीं है लेकिन वो हम उनके साथ कर रहे हैं।
This is great. So she said that, you know, their Coro is very much, and all of the Women's Federation is marking the days of activism between the 25th of November and the 10th of December. So from the day of the elimination of violence against women to the 10th of December, the Human Rights Day. And on the 25th, they had this inaugural event where they brought together the police, the family judges, people from the government department of women and child development, to say that your work is with the communities and you need to be there with the communities. And what was quite amazing is, in addition to the fact that they had two of the principal judges there and many policemen there, they also had police from 10 stations, and they used the police vans to actually put out the slogans for the security of women, which of course is something that never happens. The other brilliant part of their campaign was they also involved the rickshaw drivers, who, anyone who's been to Asia would know, our little auto rickshaws. And they part of their campaign was they created these beautiful protections, which protects the rickshaw drivers, but they're full of kind of information about violence against women and the security of women and who to call if you have a problem. So it was serving the two purposes. So this was just a brilliant, again, innovative way of collaboration across just what we saw in the beginning of human security, civil society, the police, the departments of government working together, and small businesses working together for the security of all people in society. Brilliant. Anna, maybe we hand back to you with that. And I just want to also say what I found so impressive is, I was wondering, speaking to Mumtaz yesterday, how did you manage? I've visited many of these women in their different slum communities, and in 2 rooms with the 4 children at home, they had to get Wi-Fi for the first time. They had to take turns who would be in which room. The children had to follow their classes. And she said, we were able to do that, but many people, there's one phone for the entire family. So they have to choose which child is able to follow classes. And of course, that's something we saw all across Africa and Asia. So all of these very, very tough things. And a very touching thing she said is, as she was going out to protect people, there's the risk that her own children would get infected. And the second thing she said, her 12-year-old son, he said, Mama, when you speak to these women who are facing violence during COVID, it's very disturbing for me. And, but there was no way, she said she was torn between protecting her son from the realities of what COVID was doing to people and her duty to be there to support the women who were facing these difficult situations and counsel the men. So with that, I really want to thank you, Mumtaz. It was beautiful to see you live and hear from you.
Thank you, Mumtaz. It was really an excellent.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was such an excellent illustration of what's happening in the ground. And I think us living, as myself and, my colleagues in Geneva, living in this bubble of international Geneva, it's really important to bring us back to the realities of what's happening in these huge cities around the world, what's happening in the rural areas around the world, and understand why are we even speaking about human security? Why is it important? What I always say in my work is that it's not really a choice between state and human security. It's not an either or question. It's an and question, as Rama mentioned in her intervention, that we need to make those as synonymous as possible, because one doesn't exist without the other. For just a message for all of you in the audience who are more state security oriented and are feeling a little bit uneasy about hearing about the human security and why is it important. I think that this conference can allow you to understand why human security is something that you seriously need to think about. And the Human Security Reloaded, it's not only about having a new conversation about a theoretical concept that is somewhere, discovered 20 some years before, but this is a reality. And again, this is a message that we are repeating throughout the session today. COVID has made it very painfully real. and human security needs to really be addressed. And to talk about this as well, we have promoted another member of the public to the panelist status, let's say, Ms. Mena Said, who's working in Egypt and is working with refugees in Egypt during COVID. So, Mena, would you like to share some of your experiences with us to give a little bit even more context to this conversation?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Mena Said, and I am the program coordinator of Feeder Transformation Academy. And I would like to thank Mumtaz, such a great work you're doing, such a heroic force you are putting out there. And thank you for your work. So I have been working with refugees, specifically women and girls, in informal urban settlements in Cairo. And because there has been a lot of alienation of refugees in the work market, because the status of refugees, especially as gaining socioeconomic visibility and socioeconomic mobility is not easy. So there is always domestic violence against women, especially that many of their partners either flee the country and go for illegal work and human trafficking, even among their own communities. So there was a coalition and a movement of all the organizations to work together in order to set up movable clinics for women, and as well workshops for them to actually gain their own ground, because for them they were ended up as the household, the income generators, and the pillars for all their families. So that was a situation that they haven't had in their own home country. That was a situation that many of their own families back home, when they talked to them, was not familiar. Why would you do that? Why would you go on the street and work, and you might get arrested because you don't have a permit? So we set these clinics, we set these workshops, and we set these movable kind of community gatherings in partnership with the community in order to generate social cohesion, because there was always this tension, especially in these informal settlements, for the income competition and for the resources competition. So all of these communities that came together, especially from the social, from the civil society, from the refugees, and as well from we invited many of the international organizations to come and support this movability of these women in different aspects of their life, and as well to make this something grounded for them, something that's something that them can always go back to, and for them to support each other.
Thank you very much, Mena. I think that it's really important to hear again. I'm repeating myself, I know, but this story from Egypt and how these different communities can cooperate and how human security can be worked on this really communal and local level. And I think that there is a serious call for action for the decision makers on the levels of regional or governmental institutions or international organizations as well, to get even more involved. I know that they are already doing something, but I think that it's time. Actually, it's time to do much more about this. So thank you so much, Mumtaz and Mena, for your contributions. We are now going to move to the panel. I can see that Rama wanted to comment as well, so I'll give you the floor, Rama, before I ask the questions from the public, because there are some.
Actually, I just read the last question, so I leave it to you, Anna, because when you raised the question, which I saw coming in, I'd be happy to take a go after Njoki to respond to it.
Excellent. Okay, so the first question is, does human security also include cooperative security, which involves the use of international law, diplomacy, mediation, arbitration, adjudication, the United Nations mechanisms for conflict resolutions and security, and regional organizations? Here the question mentions OSCE, but I can imagine that African Union would be one of these organizations. So I will give the floor to Njoki first and then to Rama.
Thank you, and thank you to Mumtaz and Mina for those very, very insightful realities, because it's very easy to sit here, all academics and policymakers, to forget what's going on. So yes, of course, human security, and I like what Rama was saying at the end of her presentation about metaphysical justice. And so it's about each one of us and how do we live in this world in a just way. So that, and going back also to my argument about dignity, expanding dignity, so that human security, freedom, this Amartya Sen's freedom from dignity is also freedom from inequality. So, and cooperation, and cooperation within, of course, OECD, cooperation within the UN. I think the Agenda for Peace report in the 90s was very clear on what it entailed if we're going to end conflict. And there was conflict prevention, use of good offices, what I think the person is asking, peacekeeping, peacekeeping, conflict prevention, and the use of good and these diplomatic offices, and that's cooperation. And this cooperation is, of course, there are so many things we have done towards that. After that Agenda for Peace report, one was, of course, the R2P, resolution that we have a responsibility to protect. So the whole cooperation, human security, is about, as we said, it's the human as the referent of security, not just the state, beyond the states. And we said it's not either or, it's both have to work together. So how do we make sure if we put the human as the referent of security, of ensuring the human being, wherever they are, whichever race they are, whichever gender they are, whatever class, that they are treated with dignity, then we will cooperate, not based on we will want to cooperate, we will want to deploy our good offices, whether it's ending conflict. And beyond even ending conflict, for me, the most important thing is in dealing with these inequalities, so that everybody can live in dignity, because conflict comes about because of all these indignities people live in, whether, of course, it's between different groups, but that's where we are having conflict. So let's deal with the core of the matter, which is ensuring that there's freedom from dignity, which is freedom from inequalities at the level that Mumtaz and Mina are talking about in the slums, so that women have the dignity, and beyond the women, everybody there can live with dignity, whether it's men or women. So it's even at of course, at the international level, which the person is asking, if we have that, then there'll be no reason for conflict. But yes, good offices and the Agenda for Peace report, R2P, and all these policies have been set at the global level based on a human security approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Njoki. Rama?
Yes, I'm glad you brought it back to dignity and inequality and the linkage between them, because I'll take that root of what you left us off with to get to the question and to the questioner, who is as important as the question. So, I mean, when you already first mentioned dignity in Joki, I was thinking of all of my experiences working on human security across African conflicts going back to 1999 and the early 2000s. But it immediately took me 10 years forward into the Arab Spring, because you remember it was dignity. It was just what you said, the indignity of living with the unbearable and unacceptable inequalities, political inequalities of not participating, as well as the economic, social, cultural, and, as you beautifully reminded us, metaphysical. What's the meaning of life when I'm not treated as a human being in the way that even Mumtaz so beautifully explained, of being looked at in the eyes with brotherhood and respect. It's beautiful to keep that in mind. But the key thing I wanted to say is, when people talk about inequalities and the link to conflict, the stereotypical myth is, oh, yeah, it's those people who don't have, who create conflict. But always and every time, like now, like what happened after Floyd, like in every single situation, like in the Arab Spring, it's people who come out peacefully to demand their rights. And it is the response. So they are asking for their human security, for their dignity, for the rights enshrined in the UN Charter and the UN human rights treaties. And it's when state authorities choose to respond not based on human security and their sovereign responsibility to guarantee the protection of their civilians, of their citizens, but choose military might to respond, choose power of the state apparatus rather than the power of the people and the will of the people, that conflict ensues. And that's what we saw in such a tragic way across the Arab Spring, with one or two exceptions. And that is what has led to the unbearable tragedy of Syria. So it's just wonderful that we remember that, that always there's a choice that decision makers have. And so many of my colleagues and partners in the military establishment are those who, like at the beginning of the Cold War and the birth of human security, were those who said, I cannot turn my gun against a citizen because I only joined the armed forces to protect my country from external threats to our sovereignty, but not against my own citizens. So that's just something really important to bring, as Anna, you did the two together. So going now to the question, which was, I have to mention, from Alan Ware, who is the chair of the Disarmament and Peace Commission of the Human Rights Council, besides being many other things, Right Livelihood Laureate, the coordinator of PNND, and a close associate of GCSP. He has done many joint programs with GCSP on disarmament. And your question, Alan, thank you, because it reminded me I had wanted to hark to some of the key point of what are the interlinkages between these issues. And all of these mechanisms that you mentioned, were developed within the concept of so-called freedom from fear, expanding the concept of security to cooperative security, giving member states of the United Nations an extensive so-called arsenal of means. So you do not need to use your military arsenal. We have so many more effective means which can resolve the conflict without a resort to weapons. Because once you get into weapons, you very quickly go up towards the biggest weapons you have. And so in that sense, human security, you would remember that way back when the concept was being deliberated, even at the time of the responsibility to protect, when the commissioners, who included Cornelius Sommaruga, who was then the head of the ICRC sitting in Geneva, who included, of course, our dear friend Gareth Evans, who had been the foreign minister of Australia, who included Mohammed Sahnoun, who had himself faced the war for liberation in Algeria and torture as a young student, and had become a champion of human security till his dying day just 2 years ago. as they were sitting and deliberating, they did think, should we restrict human security only to issues of freedom from fear? So should we therefore really, as Alan has asked, capitalize on these means to deliver freedom from fear? Or should we also include freedom from want? And then, as Kofi Annan did, add and emphasize the freedom to live in dignity. And at that point, they said, it's already, we are in such a constrained environment. So let's secure freedom from want. Freedom from fear. And let's hope that the wider community will also bring in the other aspects. But for that reason, within the much wider human security palette, the responsibility to protect became focused on those threats to freedom from fear, right? But human security remained this wider palette of options. And the interesting thing is that going beyond the means that you've mentioned, the most important way in which the human security gains were made was when a country like Switzerland or like Norway or like, I believe also Kenya, Njoki, you have to remind me, Chile, decided that they would use human security as the lens for their national security decision making. So their National Security Council would be guided and would guide the cabinet of ministers, the prime minister, the president, based on this lens, which also meant that they would be open to collaborate not just with other like-minded governments, but with civil society organizations, with parliamentarians, the way that PNND and the World Future Council does, with the media and academia, so that together you could really advance these huge agenda items, which it was impossible to do before. So that's what's really interesting, and that's why your question is so important. But just what I want to add to that, which I'd hoped to say before, and I realized I forgot, was, a very good example of this is what the World Future Council, what we did when the pandemic started, because since we have such a range of counselors from totally different domains, like the Allens, who are specialized in disarmament, like Maria Espinosa, who was the a president of the General Assembly and has been a minister for defense and many other things in Ecuador, is drawing on their joint expertise across all, like Vandana Shiva, who is a champion of food sovereignty. We were able to come up with a joint statement building on our work of the last 10 years to show the interconnection. So the fundamental point right now for human security, for state security, and how do we get past COVID, how do we reload state security through human security lenses in a COVID age, is how do we recognize the interconnections of health, of environment, of economy, of disarmament and military state security in order to come up with comprehensive responses. And many of them are simply too urgent for us to leave out. And this whole thing that's been promoted by the World Future Council, but by many, many other thinkers, leaders, is that we cannot allow the fight against the so-called fight to contain COVID to be at the expense of environmental security. And that's the big balance, that we have a way through policies that work, not just now, but for the longer term, for the seventh generation, as we say at World Future Council, to use the time-tested policies in order to, move forward now.
Thank you so much, Rama. And I think that there is another question actually from Alan that follows up very closely what you just said, to push you a little bit even more on this. So the governments are still investing considerably more resources in military approaches to security. So how can we move parliaments and governments to shift resources from military to human security? This is the $1,000 question, or several $1 million question. Other examples of governments who have cut military and invested more in human security. So this is a question directed to you, Rama, but Njoki, if you have anything to add, we'll give the floor to Rama first.
Alan, that's not fair that you're asking a question which you know the answer to best. So either you're trying to get up, not trying to, but either we need to actually flip the question around and ask Alan if he would like to illuminate us, because what has been very good is also the IPU, the Interparliamentary Union, with whom Alan and GCSP works very closely, and the World Future Council works extremely closely. Throughout this period, they've been really focusing through their different committees on observing, monitoring what governments are doing, because suddenly, just like we don't hear anymore what's happening in Syria and in all the conflicts around the world, we're not, the governments have sort of no due diligence and scrutiny. So many of these arms purchases and deals are going ahead, just like what we are seeing, sadly, with the deal with Saudi Arabia right now. That you agree to this and you sacrifice Palestine, and you will get all of these new military arsenals. So this is really the time for scrutiny, and the work of such organizations that are keeping that scrutiny is so important. But I'm going to shut up now so that we can hear Njoki and on this and other points. But thank you, Alan, because the work you're doing is so important. And share some of the answers to that question as well.
Yes, I agree with Rama. I think a practitioner is best suited for this, but I mean, maybe speaking for Kenya and the countries I've kind of monitored or seen what's going on, they have not reduced their military budgets, so the military budgets are still high. Of course, we will see. We'll see what will happen. They usually read the budget in June, but for this year they did not reduce it. Most of the COVID funding, sadly, for many of these African countries, came from World Bank loans. So again, I mean, that's, I think, unwise, but that's sadly what happened. Most of the COVID funding came from World Bank loans. So it puts the population or the citizens in greater debt. And yet we are not dealing with the human security issue, which is strengthening health systems. And remember, many of the African countries, they have very, very, very weak health systems. So we are really disadvantaged. So I mean, it's just catastrophic, if I would say. Yeah, so I really don't have an answer. All I can say is I know, for one, budgets to military, at least in Kenya and East African countries, have not reduced. And most of the money that is going into COVID is actually World Bank loans. So we are just sinking further in debt. And it's really, really sad. And also for political, and sadly, like in Kenya, we've had even already a corruption scandal around the COVID money from the World Bank. And also we are in a place right now, many countries are still going on with elections, which are not needed. Of course, yes, there's democracy. I mean, it goes back to the whole debate of democracy and Western democracy in many of these African states, which is more of a routine that really does not transform politics. And so you can imagine, many countries have elections this year and next year, and they are going on with elections despite the challenges of COVID. So for me, political survival is what seems to be driving, and even COVID money is being appropriated for that political survival, for the political elite. Of course, not all of them, but at least within East Africa, it's very clear. You can see what's going on in Uganda, the sham election in next door Tanzania, Kenya. They are going on with a referendum that doesn't make sense at this point in time, when we don't even have oxygen, basic oxygen, in many of these hospitals. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joki. I actually have a question for Mumtaz. This is why we brought her back to the panel. Mumtaz, if you could put yourself back on the camera and unmute yourself, and I will just ask the question, and kindly ask Rama to do the translation, if we may. So the person wants to ask how COVID crisis has affected donors' priorities to fund civil society organizations like yours who work for women's rights, and how do you manage it?
बहुत बढ़िया क्वेश्चन है और हम सब इसके बारे में सोच रहे हैं। एक तो ये है कि कोविड की वजह से सारे फंड जो है कोविड रिलीफ के ओर चले गए हैं। सो जितने भी कॉरपोरेट सेक्टर है या बड़े बड़े फंडिंग एजेंसी है, उन्होंने अपना सारा फंड जो है वो कोविड की और हेल्थ को फोकस किया है। अभी तक तो हमें लग रहा है कि जहाँ तक इस साल की बात है तो हम सब ठीक है, लेकिन नेक्स्ट फाइनेंशियल ईयर में हमें एक्चुअल पोजीशन पता चलेगी कि जैसे विमेन राइट है या बाकी के सारे इश्यूज़ है उस पे हम कैसे काम कर पाए, और शायद कुछ चीज़ों में हमें भी फ्लेक्सिबल रहना पड़ेगा। तो उस हिसाब से हम भी अभी सोच रहे हैं। अभी तो सिचुएशन अभी से ही कुछ कुछ हद तक पता चल रही कि बहुत सारे लोगों के जॉब चले गए हैं, फंड कम हुआ है, जो फंडिंग आने वाली थी वो रुक गया है। लेकिन एज अ कोरो अभी तो हम ये बिल्कुल कह सकते हैं कि फाइनेंशियल ईयर तक हम इसको सरवाइव कर पाएंगे, और नेक्स्ट इसमें हमें बिल्कुल शायद सभी की मदद भी लगे।
So first, she congratulated you for the question. She said it's a great question and thanks for asking it, because that's exactly what we are thinking about a lot. Right now, all funding, donor funding, institutional funding, corporate funding, private individuals funding, everything has gone to COVID and dealing with the health crisis. So this year we are okay. Next year, we'll really get to know what the real situation is. And we will have to remain really flexible to see how we cope with that. Many, many jobs have been lost. Funding that we were expecting for other projects has, of course, stopped. So we will have to see how we survive or what we need to change then. And I know that Mumtaz, yesterday you said, when I asked you this, when you were, I was just so amazed. I think you said you've reached 1 lakh, I have to calculate, what is that, 100,000 families in this time, giving them, relief. And I asked, how did you do it? And you said, many, many people had come forward feeling this sense of what you described as solidarity, brotherhood, humanity for each other. So that came through. But as you said, everything is now gone for COVID. What's going to happen when it's so-called back to dealing with everything else?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mumtaz, to be jumping in and out of this panel. We really appreciate you being so flexible and willing to engage with the audience. Rama, yes.
Thank you.
The most important thing, not most important, I'm going to add it. She said in the end, well, maybe we'll need to turn to all of you to support us. So you did say that at the end in a very beautiful and appealing way. And their work is so beautiful that it's definitely worth supporting. I think it's a great thing for all of us to be looking around to see which are the organizations which will really need our support, whether it's financial or other, after this period.
Thank you so much. What I wanted to do now with this last few minutes before I give my closing remarks is actually to ask Njoki and Rama to maybe give a short message to people who are not on board with all this human security idea. How do you speak to people who still think that state security is what we need to invest in, and mostly at the expense of human security consideration, especially now, especially in 2020 with COVID and other really looming security threats that touch human security individuals the most? So I can maybe ask Njoki to start and then finish with Rama.
I just want to thank you, Anna. I think for those who are not convinced of the value of human security, I would want them to think about one thing, that wars and arms and wars and arms race cannot solve today's global problems, and they have not solved any global problems. Look at that, and they need to start thinking, what actually are the real global challenges today? Then when we did the course, we were calling them the new issues in security. Now they are no longer new, they're here with us to stay. So what are, and if they can think about it, what are actually the global challenges or global challenges we have today? And what are the global security challenges which are related? And they will see that this cannot be solved by arms, buying new, equipping armies. They cannot be solved by building nuclear power or arms race. The global challenges are really human security challenges. How do we provide food for everybody so that they can live in dignity, so that they won't go and fight their neighbor? How do we provide water so that they don't have diseases that will spread to everybody? How do we provide a clean environment? How do we take care of everybody's health so that if they move from one country and even migrate to our country, whatever travel they are doing, they will not spread a pandemic? So how do we achieve this? And it's only by going back to basics, going back to this metaphysical justice. You know, in Africa, there's something we call, not in Africa, in South Africa, there's something called Ubuntu. I am because we are. You know, we are. And also in Kenya, in Kiswahili, it's called Utu, the concept of Utu, which is humanness. Let's go back to basics, to humanness, to Utu, so that I am not happy if my neighbor is not living in dignity. That this concept of a cooperative shared security, beyond now looking at this national security, how do we secure each other as a society, at a community level, like the work that Mamtaz and Mina are doing, at a national level, as a state? So let's start drawing money to where it belongs to, like, especially here in African context, strengthening health systems, not building, strengthening military systems, because that's just regime security. How do we protect our peoples? You know, how do we ensure environment so that, which is a shared environment, so that climate change effects are not this adverse if we can all come together? And you don't need an army to fight our new, sorry, I'm still calling them new, our current security challenges, which I'm so glad I studied at the Geneva Security Policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joki. Rama.
Joki has said everything, so I think it was a perfect place to end. But of course, I will add my bit. And immediately, you know, when you asked that question, I had this flood of different thoughts. The main thing I would say is, I realized, having been as a younger person, maybe in a very limited way, putting military security or state security against the security of the people. But I realized, especially working at GCSP, but throughout this time of working on global security, that actually some of my best allies, in fact, not my best allies, the most powerful champions of human security have been very senior military officers, or have been military officers who served in the different forces, the different armed forces on the ground. Indeed, I would almost say that it's those who've actually been on the battlefields, who've seen what, you know, the kinds of arms that Alan and PNND and IPU and are working to disarm, who've seen what is the effect, what does it do to me when I use this equipment, these arsenals against my fellow beings? What does it do to my Ubuntu, to my humanity? And I'm so happy you taught me Gutu. So having worked in Kenya, I should have known that, but I'm always looking for other words for Ubuntu and other African contexts. So they are the ones who become champions of human security. They were the ones who turned down their guns at the Berlin Wall and ushered in the era of, the end of the Cold War and the birth of human security. I thought of Ashraf, and unfortunately I don't, yes, I have a helmet here. You know, Ashraf, who I met in Istanbul, but he's one of the white helmets. And he said, you know, he was an Air Force officer, and I was so proud to serve my country. But the day that my captain told me that tonight you will fly over Damascus and bomb civilians, he said, I'm a quiet person. But I said, no. And he was thrown into jail and tortured and almost died. But then he came out, joined the White Helmets, and said, this is why I joined, you know, my armed forces, the Air Force, is to protect the people, to serve the people, to serve the people. And I was thinking of the American elections, where the most respected commanders of the armed forces, why did they come out and say, we need a change? We cannot continue with this administration. It was because they believed in this wide vision of human security, which includes planetary security. You cannot deny what the environmental security needs are in this era of climate change. And they realized it would be a disaster. And it's the realization, which is part of what World Future Council, PNND, and other groups are doing, is when you see the ecological impact of the defense industry, the cost of nuclear weapons is not just financial, it is devastating for the planet. So the impact it has obviously on health over many, many generations. So, and the fact that now, whether you are wearing a uniform or whether you're a civilian, everyone, your children, your grandparents, your parents can get this disease, which is caused by this interconnection, which we cannot stop across borders, across all domains. So if you want to protect your own family, you will need, whether you're a political leader, a military officer, a national security council advisor, you will have to look at the interconnectedness of issues. And I really recommend, we came up here at Home for Humanity with all our collaborators around the world with a very simple document we called the Humanity Charter, which is just like 6 simple points as a new starting point of what could this new world of planetary security, of recognizing that humanity contains the word unity. And we have to recognize our unity, not just with other humans, but with everything in the universe, and secure and be responsible for everything in the universe. But at the start of World Future Council, we said we adopt the Earth Charter. And this might be a time at the 25th anniversary of GCSP, the 70th anniversary of the UN, to say we didn't have the understanding then, the metaphysical understanding, the humanity, the wisdom to recognize it in 1992 at the Earth Summit. But today, let us adopt the Earth Charter, because it says it all. It covers justice, it covers economics, it covers every issue, and it recognizes that, I just had this one quote, which I just love, that humanity is part of a vast evolving universe. Earth, our home is alive with a unique community of life. And the protection of Earth's vitality, diversity, and beauty is a sacred trust. And it ends by saying that ours be a time remembered for the awakening of a new reverence for life, the firm resolve to achieve sustainability, the quickening of the struggle for justice and peace, and the joyful celebration of life. That's what life is for. That's what nature showed us while we finally stopped our machines and went home, and nature could enjoy its natural habitat again. And I think, and the fact, the beauty, and that's part of the idea of Home for Humanity, is each one of us, it's no longer decision makers up there, because now it's all together, as Mumtaz shows us and Mena shows us. Each one of us from our homes, just like we are doing right now, can be a launch pad for this renewal, this new paradigm that now we desperately need.
Thank you so much, Rama. And I really wanted to thank you, Rama, and you, Njoki, for your inspiring contributions. I think for everybody who was on this conference, I think we are leaving this conference with more hope and for a better future. I also wanted to thank the public for your thought-provoking questions, inspiring an even deeper conversation. And interestingly, Rama, what you just mentioned, that the GCSP 25th anniversary is organized under the hashtag Only Together. And I think what you just said was just perfect for the closing of the session, because it's only together where we can achieve human security for all, and linking it to the SDGs, and linking it to the planet, and linking it to the state security as well. So it's all encompassing, and we all need to strive at any level that we are active in our lives to bring this to, first of all, reload this human security, so update it to our context, the current context, but also to teach others around us, within our organizations, within our families, about the importance of the concept of human security and how it can be achieved. for the future. So I wanted to thank our panelists, thank the audience, and I wish you an excellent afternoon or evening or morning, wherever you are on this planet, and wish you an excellent weekend. Thank you.